So, welcome to the Pack IQ webinar on smarter sourcing for flexible packaging. Our speaker today is Leslie Hodo. Leslie's been with RTI for 9 years and leads our technical services group. Prior to RTI, Leslie spent 25 years in plastic manufacturing field with various roles including product development and commercialization. She brings deep domain expertise within both the technical aspects of film manufacturing as well as the economics that plays into the manufacturing process. Her core role at RTI is to break down and develop economic cost components at a very granular level, thereby bringing transparency to a packaging provider's economics and cost elements. So Leslie, over the past few years, RTI has analyzed over $1 billion in the flexible plastics category. That includes everything from basic monolayer film to very complex multi-layer barrier film, both printed and non-printed. The constant we see, especially in the multi-layer category, are very healthy supplier margins. We consistently see margins exceeding 50%, which comes as a surprise to most of our clients who often work on single-digit margins for the product being packaged. So can you start by discussing some key areas that tend to allow for these high supplier margins?
Sure, I definitely will. Let's start with some of the key cost drivers within the flexible category. Um, these can vary depending if you have monolayer film or multi-layer barrier film, but in general, resin cost is a top contributor. The key setup cost, print setup cost, is a major contributor when it comes to printed film. Conversion add-ons, if you've got zippers or Velcro, different things like that, any special features, certainly going to play a role in cost. And as well as how you order your volumes, the frequency that you order, and if you take advantage of combo orders. And to your question of why we have high margins, we consistently do see high supplier margins in the barrier film category. First, there's a perceived complexity when it comes to multi-layer barrier films. The supplier would have you believe that everything in this process is complex. Secondly, I would say 20 to 25 years ago, that was probably true. There were a few leading innovators in this category. They were dealing with new products, new technologies, and gaining experience as they worked through those. And at that point, I could see why margins were justified. Fast forward to the last several years, there are many suppliers that have mastered this manufacturing process. And improvements in technologies, equipment, they've gained that experience over time, yet the suppliers are able to maintain these margins and have you believe that those complexities are still there. Let's start with looking into a high level overview of the key processes in manufacturing. First, now, if your it probably goes through at least one, it could go through all of these processes. And first, we look at extrusion. Is it multi layer? Is it single layer? Are there specialty resins involved? Printing, what type of printing, how many colors, how much ink is used. Lamination is another one. It can be extrusion or adhesive lamination, fairly simple process these days. And slitting or pouch conversion. Is it converted to a pouch or bag? Do you have super tight dimensions? Are you adding zippers or Velcro or laser scoring at this stage? Each time, it's important to note each process that your material goes through is going to add margin to your cost. And suppliers want you to believe that each of these are complex when in fact, sometimes they're not. Taking a deeper dive at multi-layer blown film. Now, barrier films are often 7 to 9 layers. There are many different configurations that these can have. For example, you can have a PE sealant that adds to your flexibility. You can have tie layers that bond your nylon EVOH and PE layers. Nylon's great for toughness. EVOH is great for flexibility with high O2 barrier. Um, it's important to know what's in each of your layers. Um, Even though your supplier will likely not tell you the exact ratios and percentages, but it's important to know what they are and what they do, what they're intended for. Adhesive lamination, this is simply what it sounds. This is using an adhesive to bond two incompatible layers that you couldn't necessarily run together on an extruder. And it just gives you more flexibility and adds to your options. Flexographic printing. So this is by far the most common print method that I deal with in the last several years. Um, it's really come a long way. It allows for faster line times, really fast changeovers. Print plates are relatively inexpensive. And if you have graphics that change once in a while, this is probably what the method that they're using. It does allow for uh, changing inks fairly quickly. There's been new technologies in recent years that allow for a fraction of the time to change over than in past years.
So, touching on the printing process, I mean, we know from experience this is kind of a hidden within the cost structure. Again, one of those areas where suppliers can essentially add margin without it being totally recognized.
Mhm.
So, how do you approach bringing transparency to what a client is being charged from a setup standpoint?
That is a great question because it's the setup charges are hidden. And here I've got an example of tiered pricing. This is a real example of someone's price table. And many of you may have tiered pricing as well for your materials. Setup charge is in there. It's just not often talked about and it's not often shown at any point during the negotiation. Um, the way we handle this is we have a method where we break down your current pricing to look at setup and base cost individually. And you can see I have the price equation at the top there. Your setup and your base costs are fixed cost. So every time you place an order, you're paying a certain setup cost and a certain base cost. Um, the setup cost includes, just like it sounds, everything that it takes to set up that material. So it includes scrap, it includes downtime, it includes labor, and it is amortized over the quantity that you order. Base cost is everything that's in your particular product without regard to setup. So it includes margin, it includes profit, inks, film, line time to run the actual material. Those together form your price. Um, and the reason that we use this method, it does reflect the business. Your supplier is separating these out and is allowing for setup costs as well. It is apples to apples because we are not looking at volume. Um, Again, because they're a fixed price over the run. And if we take that tiered pricing that we saw earlier, the way that we break this down is we just simply graph it. So there's no funny business here. This is just graphing those numbers, price versus quantity. And you see that it starts to form a curve. And that's really a really important thing, that your price is not a point. It's not just a number, but it's a curve. From there, we can um, do a curve fitting to those points and extrapolate out what the supplier is using for base and setup in your calculation to develop that tiered pricing. Um, you can see here that the setup is $3,000 and that the base is $121. From there, now that we know what your current price looks like, we can do a cost model and see what are your actual other costs that are in, what should it cost to make your product. These are all the manufacturing costs that go into a product without regard to profit or margin. And you can see that raw materials are the vast majority. In this case, this is a laminated example. 71% of the cost to manufacture is in your raw materials. I've got one more example here. This is a 7-layer barrier film, and you can see here that 73% of raw materials make up the cost to manufacture.
So clearly understanding the true cost of raw materials or resin in this case is critical to having a level of transparency in your supplier's economics. How much can someone rely on, the current industry indices from a resin market standpoint as to how close is that to what suppliers are truly paying for resin, and can they rely on that?
Well, Caton, they really cannot rely on resin indices to show the true cost of resin. I've got a quick example here. I mean, fortunately, I'm able to leverage RTI's Resin Smart practice to have true transparency into the resin market. I've got an example of a quarter. This is average cost per pound over this example quarter. And you can see comparatively the index versus the true market price, that difference. It's, in this case, 4 to 9 cents difference. That's margin that's hidden by the supplier. And with 60 to 80% of your manufacturing costs being resin, 5 to 10 cents can be a significant impact to your bottom line.
Okay, good.
Now that we've got resin costs, we can put that together with the other manufacturing costs and compare it to your current pricing. We've got what we call a target price. So we've got a target base and a target setup here. And just looking at the base and setup, you can see those differences. We graph both of those together. It shows you, of course, a curve. Setup price accounts for the shape of the curve. It highly, especially at that lower level, and you can see there that the steepness of those curves are different. That's going to impact your spend. Um, Once we graph those, I know that, and you've probably negotiated with your supplier at some point, asked for a lower price, and they've said, "Why don't you order more? Why don't you increase your volumes? It'll reduce your piece price." And while that is true, the goal is to reduce the entire curve. You will never get far enough down that curve to match your target pricing. Another way that we can increase efficiencies is by combo ordering. And combo ordering is when you have a group of items that have similar graphics, and you can order, instead of having, say, if you order 3 items that are similar, instead of having one, um, or sorry, 3 full setup costs for each of those individually, you could have 1 full setup cost and 2 partial setup costs, saving in that one example for one order, it saves several $1,000s. Now, if your supplier is scheduling smartly, which I know they are already running like this. So it's important for you to be able to take advantage and get, you know, your price to reflect the way that you're ordering.
Good, good. Thank you. Well, let's talk about maybe some key takeaways. As we talked about, there's a perceived complexity that certainly influences supplier margin. Knowing the processes that your product goes through, understanding the basic context of each manufacturing step, can really help shed light on that perceived complexity. And then understanding the relationship between setup and base, as Leslie discussed, is very important if you want to have true transparency into your supplier's economics. And then we talked about resin being really the major cost driver. The indices are certainly inflated over actual market pricing. It's one of those areas that suppliers really depend on for margin stretch, and you're strengthening your understanding of those true resin market pricing will help you again from a transparency standpoint. So having a stronger overall understanding facilitates a more transparent and balanced partnership with your supplier. and that's the key. So with that, let's see if we have any questions. Okay. So, Leslie, you mentioned supplier margins exceeding 50% on a consistent basis.
Mhm.
So, how do you determine what an appropriate margin is for a supplier in the case of flexibles?
I would say that the first thing that we look at when it comes to margins is is this a new material? Is it new? Is it unique? Is it different than others? Is it patented? That's the first thing we look at to warrant a high margin. The next thing we do is we take our experience in the market and we see what are other people accepting um, at that time for that type of material. Um, Ultimately, the goal is to assess a margin that's fair, that would, and I'll say fair meaning reasonable, and would a non-incumbent take that business for that margin? Would it be profitable and sustainable for both parties?
Okay, good, good. And then next question is when you're reviewing setup cost that you discussed, what are the major elements that you consider that goes into a setup cost?
Yeah, that's good too because setups can be extensive or they can be short. So really what it boils down to with setup is time, line time, material. We do take scrap into account. So if the material is very expensive, that's going to add to it. And labor. How many people does that take and what's involved in the complexities. So time, material, and labor, I would say are the top.
Okay, good,
Yeah.
good. Well, we appreciate your questions. We certainly appreciate you joining us. And if you have further questions or would like to have maybe a more in depth discussion, feel free to email us at cmorris@rtiglobal.com. And again, we really appreciate you joining us and have a great day.